Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome to this evening segment of Shack Attack. We've moved, as you notice, from being on Saturday afternoons in the month of Ramadan to being Thursday evening. And I've moved from being in the studio in Robert Sham, Johannesburg, to the comfort of my own home just for this week. Akil Wadi, my co host, is currently not with me. And so I opted to broadcast from home in the spirit of being safe and I think not braving the cold, I suppose, putting ourselves at risk, of course, of becoming weak against what could be the infection as well or the virus. So we have, inshallah, with us this evening, Dr. Shoyab Wadee from the Islamic Medical Association, and we understand that the masjids are to reopen under level 3 lockdown regulations, and that this is not a blanket opening, but rather that Masajid, with the guidance of the IMA, with the guidance of various ulama bodies, will then determine on their own and based on their own circumstances whether or not to open. And the discussion this evening is around the merits of doing so, and then if to do so, what exactly would be needed to suffice a safe return to the masjid for those who are healthily able to do so. So, without any further ado, and we understand we have just up until 8 o'clock this evening to discuss this, we have Dr. Shoyab Wadee from the Islamic Medical Association. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and welcome to Dr. Wadee to Salam Media this evening.
Alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, Shakeel, and Jazakallah. Thanks for having me.
Yes, I think I also thank you for making yourself available for this discussion this evening. Something that could, of course, have waited. Many are saying, why not wait for the Gazette to come out? I could be wrong, but I didn't see that having been released formally as yet with regards to the religious places of worship. Besides that, many feel that no, we need to be proactive and people need to be preparing for either mentally going back or mentally retreating from the masajid, and with that coming, of course, the physical necessities that are to be put in place for a safe return to the masjid. So, of course, we saw the statement released by the Islamic Medical Association this evening, something that guides towards what happens in the case of masjids reopening. So, I think first of all, just to ask, to what extent is there a call to say, just hold on, just wait, don't open as yet, and to what extent do you believe, Doctor, that would be heeded before going to the discussion around opening and what opening means and how to open? To what extent would you say people would actually not be opening the masajid?
So, I mean, obviously, the Muslim community, together with other faith-based communities, have been asking for the masjids to be open. I think the initial understanding was by most people was that the lockdown would be a short period and then we would be over it. But I think as time has gone over the past months, it's become apparent, obviously, that we're going to need to find a way to live with this virus for some time, at least until a vaccine is found, which inshallah will be able to give better protection and allow people to, to be at much lower risk of infection and complications. So, with that in mind, the government has sort of moved their paradigm, as you noticed, despite the fact that the numbers of infections have been increasing, and we're now starting to move towards a peak infection scenario, especially in the Western Cape. The government has continued with relaxing some of the legislation which they put in place at the time of the lockdown. Their reasons for the lockdown were that the country needed time to prepare. And obviously, it's going to be impossible to prepare for every eventuality. And some of the models are predicting really huge numbers, which practically the country is going to be unable to prepare for. So I think the government is satisfied that they've done what they can. Let's put it that way. That they've created additional capacity in the hospitals around the country, that they've created accommodation for people who can't isolate, and that they've created, a contingency plan to deal with the virus. Obviously, if the worst case hits us, even with those plans, we would be quite severely overrun. And then, obviously, then the decision to open up the economy to allow people to start earning money and to be able to contribute to the welfare of their families. And then, from a spiritual perspective, I think in the long term, there's understanding that humanity is not just an economic animal or an animal which needs physical help, but it's also an animal which is part of God's creation, which needs to contact and be in connection with God all the time. And from a Muslim perspective, obviously, we know that the masjid is not necessary for our contact with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is closer to us than our jugular vein. It's right next to us all the time. It's with us here as we speak. But the masjid has got a significance in terms of our communal and congregational prayers, and in terms of the soul of a community, of a Muslim community. So I think that desire to get back to the masjid has been there in every part of the Muslim community. And the government has sort of understood that psychology as part of. Obviously, there's no question that there will be risk in any activity, whether it's going to the shop or going to the masjid, or whether it's going to work, going to the hospital. So as long as there are people who have infection and who are able to carry it, there will be a risk of getting infection. But we've moved past the phase where the government is concentrating on containing the infection. So I think in the first month there was very much this feeling that if we lock down, we will stop the infection in its tracks. And I think that was a misunderstanding, both from a scientific side and from a conceptual side of what we were able to achieve. There are some countries which were able to achieve that initially, and some which have continued to achieve that. For example, New Zealand managed to sort of stop the infection completely. But then Ireland, no one can fly in and fly out, and they have a much different dynamic from South Africa. But once it started spreading in South Africa, that ability to contain the virus is gone. So now we need to sort of live with it, but we need to try and reduce the impact of the virus in terms of its effect on people's lives. That means how many people it kills. So we need to mitigate that as much as possible. And at the same time, we need to sort of mitigate the impact on the rest of our lives, our economic, spiritual, and every other aspect of our lives.
So is the first, of course, I think framing our thinking around that paradigm to say that the virus is no longer going to be curbed from spread. It's a bottle that is open, it's leaking, it's leaked. Perhaps the glass has cracked already. The question is how near or how far do you stand to that glass? And so the question then abounds, if masajid are contemplating opening or not opening for that matter, there is perhaps a debate around the blameworthiness of not opening completely versus opening and giving the musallis the option. But I think the question obviously remains, is the masjid in question then capable of providing the social distancing measures, the sanitizing measures, and the costs that come with doing so, over and above perhaps a reduction in funding for the basic water, electricity, and so on. So would we see a case perhaps where only those massages that actually can afford to run a socially distant or a COVID-19 ready masjid, only those being open for the time being?
So, as I said, we need to try and mitigate the effect of the spread. So one of the ways to mitigate how many people die is to make sure that people get infected at a slow rate, so that there are facilities available to look after them. So that's the thinking around social distancing and around reducing the number of people in the masjid. So that's the government's thinking around those issues. So that, for example, if there's an infection in a masjid and 50 people are vulnerable, we know all 50 won't get the infection, but it means that only 50 at that time have been exposed. And obviously, the government has made it clear that 50 is the maximum. So we still await regulation. So the statement we put out was really an interim statement, because we really have been getting a lot of calls for people to have information to know how they can prepare. It's not a definitive statement. It's not going to be a one size fits all, and it says that as much in the document. And you're right, there are masajid where if they're really in an epicenter where a lot of people are infected, in what they call a hotspot, and a large percentage of the population are affected, and their musallis are elderly and very old, and they're not able to afford the what comes with some of those social distancing measures, that they may need to modify how they apply. They may need to have smaller jama'ah, so that the people at risk are much less. They may need to say, okay, really, we would take people who we expect to be very minimally affected. So we know that people between the ages of about um, birth and 40, really the majority of them get better. Obviously, we know that it's not compulsory for people who are not baligh to be in the
Of
masjid
course.
as part of the congregation. So that leaves us with an age group of, say, between 15 up to about 40, who are really at minimal risk of infection causing major problems to themselves. So certain masajid may decide that, okay, these are the people that should come to the masajid in our community because we really have a hotspot. And then those people should obviously take care if they're living with elderly people, people who are ill, people who are sick. So there are many ways which masajid can do it. And what we've asked people to do in the document is to look at the community of their masjid and see who is able to assist them, who has got medical experience, who has got engineering and architectural knowledge to say, okay, these are the areas of the masajid which are well ventilated, that we can use and are easy to clean. These are the flows. This is the easiest way to come in, come out. And then also, because the numbers are maybe limited, but people have a yearning to perform salah in congregation, they can identify, musallas and other small masajid in the area which are existent and which may also be used within the capacity. So I think those individual things are difficult to prescribe for every masjid. Masjid. On top of that, as you're well aware, Shakeel, there's not I wouldn't say there isn't a unity of opinion amongst our ulama in terms of what is permissible from a fatwa perspective in terms of social distancing and so forth and so on. So it's very difficult to prescribe to a masjid. There are some ulama who have said if you can't perform salah shoulder to shoulder, then you should keep your masjid closed. And there's no problem with that. If that's what the Jamaat and the committee decides in that particular area, that's perfectly fine. Whereas there are other fatwa which say that in this, because of the need and the necessity which is bred by this particular threat to life, and because of the risk to people at home and elsewhere, that makes what would normally be prohibited in the masjid, which is leaving gaps, it makes it permissible at this stage. So there is that multiplicity of opinions, and I think people must then discuss in their own committees the fatwa that they're willing to accept, together with the position they have, as well as the advice they are getting from local practitioners. So the situation in the Western Cape is likely to be very different from the situation in Northwest. So if you're living in a small town in the Northwest where there's 30 Muslims in the whole town, and your masjid was built for a time when the town had 300 Muslims, you could probably all make salah with Jama'ah every time, even with no social distancing, because probably nobody in that community is infected, or you know very quickly if somebody is infected.
Yes,
whereas in Cape Town it may be very different.
Actually brings me to the next question is, in the case where there is no infections at all in a locality, some place that is quite remote, would it be wise for them to say, look, it's fine, then we can go ahead business as usual because there is no infection, to the extent of which using all facilities in the masjid would be fine, or should they be cautious that even doing so might still lead to even one a person bringing the virus to the town?
Yes, I think we need to accept that there is a reality. I mean, the virus is here. It's not a figment of our imagination. So there is some responsibility which falls on the masjid committee when they're making these decisions, and that's why I say they shouldn't make it necessarily without some advice from people in the community. It's not a decision that one person in the masjid should take. As you say, there may be some masajid which have less support, and that's true in some of the townships, in some of the areas where the Muslim community has dwindled. And I think we need really to show our spirit of brotherhood and ukhuwah. Other masajid must offer to assist those masjid. We need to see how we can work together to say, okay, you guys don't have the money and the facilities and the ability to be able to do this. Let us help you. So, for example, if there's a well-off, wealthy masjid in Greenside or Sandton, and they need to help to support a masjid in Alex or Soweto or Guguletu or wherever it is, they should look at how they can help to support that community with what is required to protect that community and the people in that community. We don't leave any other Muslim community drowning. And then obviously, as I said, if those masajid feel that they're unable to cope, if the risk in their community is too high, that they don't have access to proper care if they do get sick, then and the committee can discuss with the local ulama and the local doctors, and they can keep the masajid closed until they have the ability to do that. And then people who want to perform congregation can then link up with masajid close by, which have got the ability to do that. So I think these are things which are going to evolve. There's a lot of this is not something masajid haven't been closed in my lifetime and probably in almost everybody's lifetime in South Africa. So these are things we're going to need to learn as we open them up, and as we and it will also be very important for the Muslim community in South Africa to form some type of network to talk to each other, to share experiences and positive experiences which can help to prevent infection, also to support each other in cases where infection is happening, with the information and how things are going. We should be honest with ourselves, we should be honest with the community, and I really think it would be useful for us to have a database of infections which are occurring in the masjid, and in 3 months' time we may find we can go to government and say, look, the amount of infections that are occurring in the masjid is negligible. We actually think it's safe to open the entire masjid. But without us collecting that type of information and data, knowing what's happening, and this is not only unique to masajid, it's a problem in the entire world. This virus has presented unique challenges. It's similar to others, but it's different in important ways. So we do need to try and get proper data, and that spirit of empiric investigation and understanding is not outside the spirit of Islam. It's part of the spirit of Islam.
Precisely.
Many would say it was developed by Muslims.
Yeah, I think that must be stressed, is that it's not un-Muslim of us to be critical of these things and to even ask the hard questions of should we open, and when we do open, who gets excluded, who gets invited, and the adab of respecting the elders might not be that they have to come, but that you actually have to respect them to say stay at home, and that is probably the best way of respecting them. So changing the way we think and believe about the way we socialize as Muslims, quite importantly. But we do not have that much time left, so I have a few questions. I'm going to try and run through them quite quickly, and hopefully respond. If you could respond quickly as well, just so that because some people have submitted questions to us.
Sure.
So, as much as we possibly able to do so, without pressure.
Yes.
So, speaking about the fact that the youth might be the ones who are able to hold the masjid, hold the fort of the masjid without being a risk, then to what extent are the youth, or should the youth be involved in terms of repurposing the masjid from being just for salah, but turning those into also places for food distribution or even financial relief? We understand there's a financial burden on people during the lockdown. And thirdly, a place for people to report either their mental illness or mental drawbacks, as well as perhaps gender-based violence as a result of lockdown. So we are basically asking about the masjid playing a multi-purpose role during lockdown, which perhaps, with the imam being listed as an essential service provider, could then see some more meaningful change also being made with the broader issues that COVID-19 brings. So a quick response to that, and then we have a few other questions regarding the wudu khana and some other aspects as well before we close, inshallah.
So I think if any effort which draws people towards the masjid, which should be the center of our community, and maybe in the past we haven't done that. So where there's a threat and where there's a change, there's also an opportunity. And as they say, absence makes the heart grow fonder. So maybe our forced absence from the masjid will draw people towards the masjid as it opens, and also it presents an opportunity for people to rethink how the masjid should be used as and what purpose it should play in the community. And I agree with you that it can be a much more central aspect of community support, besides a place for congregational prayer. And then obviously they are mutually dependent. If it becomes a place where the community is supported, the congregational prayer will also flourish.
Precisely, and I think also it will reduce the amount of people doing things on their own in silos, and ensure that those who have received, for example, food have received, and those who haven't will receive, and there's no duplication of efforts. But moving on from that quite swiftly, regarding the wudu khana, so should they be open? Should they be closed? Should it be negotiable? There's a question that lingers in the minds of.
In general, the problem with the wudu khana that we have is that the wudu khana is meant to be a contingency normally. So for the function of the masajid, for most people, it should be better to make wudu at home and come to the masajid anyway. But the wudu khana is there as a contingency and as a courtesy to musallis who are traveling and so forth and so on. We don't foresee that there'll be a lot of traveling musallis at the moment, partly because of the restrictions for movement and so forth. But I think so. We anticipate that the wudu khana should be closed. The guidelines have suggested, however, that that maybe one bathroom can be kept open because there will be people who have emergencies and may need to go to the bathroom, and that's can be difficult to foresee. Obviously, that it's easier to clean if there's only one bathroom. Maybe the masajid can look at seeing whether one or two bathrooms can be open so that they can rotate the cleaning. And then from the wudu perspective, it may also be possible to keep one station open, but the real understanding should be that in general, people should make wudu at home and come to the masajid. If you are going to use the wudu facilities, you would need to wipe down the taps before you and the seat before you sit down and make wudu, which is not too difficult to do. That can be done, but it can't be done for 50 people. It can be done for 1 or 2 people.
So, okay, 3 last questions, Dr. Wadee, and we appreciate you being here with us. The one is, so an idea came forth from the Strand Muslim community whereby they actually cordoned off parts of their mosque before lockdown. Where,
Sorry, I'm
for
losing
example,
you there, Shakeel.
okay, can you hear me now? Can you hear me now?
It's a bit patchy at the moment, Maf.
Okay, hopefully that this will be a bit better. Let's just give an indication if you
That's
can
a
hear
bit
me.
better, yeah.
Okay, so the
That's
Strand
better.
community, cordoned off their Salah facility into sections where when you walk into the masjid, the front section is for Fajr, and then a later section is for Dhuhr, later section for Asr, another one for Maghrib, another one for Isha. That way, people who come for Dhuhr don't pray on the same place like those who have prayed for Fajr, and it allows a more less burdensome, quick cleaning process to happen than having to steam the entire place or spray the entire place every time. Is that viable?
Yeah, there's many different strategies. So, for example, you could say the same 50 people should come for 1 day of Salah, for Maghrib to Maghrib the next day. Then, and they should stand in the same spot every day. So you know that the person who stood in the spot, the previous Salah was the same person. Then you only need to clean the masjid once a day because the same person coming to the same spot. Similarly, what you pointed out, if you make multiple different areas, and may not be possible in every masjid, depends on
Of
the
course.
number of the size of the
As,
masjid,
as
and then
depends.
so I think those are the type of things which are perfectly flexible, and masajid can look at ways where they can make their lives easier and the logistics easier for them. I mean, some of the things we suggested are not hard and fast rules; they're just there to make it easier to clean, like using vinyl flooring or plastic flooring, or using the non-carpeted area, because it's much easier to clean tiles than a carpet. On a regular basis, so those are the type of things which masajid can look into based on the anatomy of that masjid and also the ventilation in that masjid. So you really, if you're in a small Jamaat Khana with no windows and you're going to have 30 people in there, it may not be such a great idea. Whereas if you're in a large masjid with a double volume ceiling and multiple windows and ventilation, probably even more than 50 people could be here, but we will be hamstrung by government regulations from that perspective at the moment.
Okay, then speak to us about the non-compliance of a masjid to adhere to these rules. What happens? Can a musalli call? Who does a musalli call? Obviously, we as Muslims would rather speak to the committee ourselves and sort it out in-house before it becomes a public issue. But to what extent and then to whom do people then go to should it become an issue?
So, I mean, this will happen. I think it's going to happen in masjids, it's going to happen in schools, it's going to happen in hospitals. It is happening in hospitals, it's happening in supermarkets. There are some people who are going to be more anxious than others about what they see and what's happening. I would implore people to try and sort it out within the masjid committee. And then the masjid committee needs to be honest and determined to make sure that they fulfill the responsibility which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has placed upon their shoulder, both in protecting the masjid and protecting the community which frequents the masjid. So the masjid is a building. What makes the masjid is the Muslims. So we need to protect the congregation of the Muslims in the masjid. So I think it will be very important that the committee takes their responsibility seriously. If there are concerns from the community that people are non-compliant, that there's too many people coming, they may need to relook. And this will happen. It's inevitable. It's happening in every sector of society. There's a significant learning curve which is going to have to happen. And so, I mean, it may also be prudent for some masajid to say, look, for the first week, maybe we will run this system and we will adjust it, or we will only have 30 people until we can test our system, and then move to 40 people, and then move to 50 people. So those are the type of things that they can do. And there are many different, one of the questions we get frequently is, how do you choose the musallis? There are many, many different ways you can choose it. The idea is to have social justice and justice so people have an opportunity while protecting people who are vulnerable, And then also some people, will always be unhappy. There will always be a group of people who are unhappy, and you just have to deal with the fact that unfortunately you can't please everybody, and they only need to please Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
So ultimately, that leads me to the last question from students at campus. A few of our universities are going back to class and others are completely shut down. In the case of those who are going back to class, sometimes students go in for a short while and then return home. Is it viable to open those masajid on campuses, or would it be wiser to have them close?
I think campus opening will depend very much on how much sort of funding and ability you have to clean it. But students are very good volunteers, so I mean it would be very easy to say that we will have four Dhuhr salahs at this time, no matter how many people come, with a maximum of 30 or whatever. And for my memory of campus, usually that's how it works anyway. Multiple small jamaat in and out because of people's different schedules. And then you ask each jamaat to take individual responsibility for cleaning, which is also possible for students. So they may have a bit of time, they make the salah, and then once they're done with the salah, they clean up the mat. You leave a mop and the disinfectants there, they clean it thoroughly, and then they leave and ready for the next jamaah which comes in. So I think those things are possible if the students and the jamaah, and the reward for that, I'm sure, will be significant, because we know what the reward is for keeping the masajid clean and hygienic.
Dr. Wadee, in closure, we say shukran and jazakallah to you for your time. We also implore to the communities to read the ground that you are surrounded by and understand the needs of the community that you are situated in, and of course not to allow the opening of the masajid to be hindered by negativity or a spread of the virus by perhaps being irresponsible. And for the elderly perhaps who are being barred, to bear with us and understand that perhaps it is for the better that certain people do go and those and others don't. And perhaps in the youth becoming more involved, it will create capacity that we have not seen before of an involvement and a fervor among young people to take the reins and assist the trustees and so on. And as much as we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to protect us in the masajid, as well as outside of the masajid, those at home can continue, of course, in the ibadah that we've been doing nonetheless, and relying on experts and, of course, experts in the medical fraternity, as well as those ulama, the knowers of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to assist us in navigating the space. And so to the Islamic Medical Association, we thank you, and all other subsidiaries involved in assisting us navigating this very, very trying and confusing time of COVID-19. Dr. Wadee, shukran. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Shukran. Alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
That was Dr. Shoyab Wadee from the Islamic Medical Association. And in summary, we of course ask people to implore common sense and to lend a hand of financial or even intellectual or support to the masjids that you are surrounded by, to ensure that the rolling out of masajid is safe, and in the cases of which it will not be safe or economically viable, for those to remain closed and for those to remain a test for what the community could be in terms of providing broader relief along the lines of feeding, mental assistance, or even a safe haven for economic and gender-based violence as well throughout the time of COVID-19. We say shukran and assalamu alaikum to listeners, and we do know that this conversation is not over and will continue. That is from me, Shakeel Garda of Shakatek Salam Media. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.